Welcome everybody to the second day of the International Peace Conference 2018. Last year, 2017, International Peace Conference had a different theme. DP2s here remember it was a challenging power, and through the theme we explored the different power dynamics and structures in our societies and communities that at the heart of the matter are essential for a lasting and sustainable peace. This year, however, we have the theme of a matter of choice, and I'm going to talk very briefly about some of the spheres within the global spectrum within which the realization or achievement of peace is undermined by different obstacles. For example, on the international level, the decisions and the policies that organizations and global leaders adopt ultimately affect ordinary citizens who are at times, unfortunately, not even represented in the decision-making table. On the national or community level, the choices or the actions that citizens make bear a certain responsibility, and their actions and their choices ultimately affect the course that their communities and societies take. And on the personal level, finally, the choices that we make ultimately affect our inner peace, our relationship with others, and our general well-being. And as such, the theme of a matter of choice with the very important question mark in brackets explores these choices and allows for a thoughtful forum and a forum for you to debate and to reflect on the choices that you make and that ultimately affect not only you and those around you, but the planet that we inhabit.
This conference is not merely 3 days of speeches, workshops, or interactive sessions. It is the beginning of making a choice to take action, however small it may be, but to never cease making choices to improve ourselves and the world we live in. How your choices can break through the hard walls that keep us grounded, and how challenging power can lead to truth, justice, freedom, and peace. It is the beginning of a journey of individual action in the face of collective silence. Engage in workshops as they cross political boundaries of Malta and Burkina Faso, protest against neoliberal democracy, explore cultural movements, spiritual movements of crushing capitalism and of rising indigenous rights, and of the media influencing. Contribute to these workshops with your own personal experiences. Join the community panel this afternoon led by Tom Oden, where inspiring members of our own UWC community will share their life experiences. We have an Iranian-born business leader, a registered nutritionist from Chennai, and the founder of an innovative business. A panel of Palestinian and Israeli students and a Canadian student will weave narratives of their own choices at the student panel on Saturday night and break through personal experiences, political dilemmas, and thoughtful realizations. Listen to the speakers draw you into their journey of making choices, tough choices. Listen to the sounds of breaking voices and challenging authority. Listen to the sounds of your beliefs being loosened, your assumptions being challenged. The choice is yours. Are you brave enough to take it? Thank you.
So before we have our very important and interesting speaker who will enlighten you about the choices that he has made in his life and the choices that not only impacted him and the people around him, before we allow him the podium to speak to you all, we have some performances, and the performers will explain their pieces themselves. Thank you very much.
Right, so I'm Tanud, I'm in DP1, and I'm gonna play I'm gonna play Hurt by Johnny Cash. And normally I'm not very fond of country music, but this is such a legendary tune that I've loved almost all my life. And it's not an original song, it's a cover by Nine Inch Nails. Yeah, but it connects so deeply with it because this was the last song that he recorded before his death, and that was in 2003. And in the end, he reflects all the choices that he ever made in his life, and I think that's how it connects to the song. I hurt myself today to see if I still feel. I focus on the pain, the only thing that's real. The needle tears a hole, the old familiar sting. Try to kill it all away, but I remember everything. What have I become? My sweetest friend. Everyone I know goes away in the end, and you could have it all. My empire of dirt, I will let you down, I will make you hurt. I wear this crown of thorns upon my liar's chair, full of broken thoughts I cannot repair. Beneath the stains of time, the feelings disappear. You are someone else, I am still right here. What have I become? My sweetest friend. Everyone I know goes away in the end. If you could have it all, my empire of dirt, I will let you down, I will make you hurt. If I could start again, a million miles away, I will keep myself, I will find a way.
Hello, my name is Lana Bitar and I come from Aleppo city in Syria. I'm gonna present a poem called Home. Home. And it's exactly what it's about. It's about home. By English Sudani poet Dersan Shara. Home. No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. You only run for the border when you see the whole city running as well. Your neighbors running faster than you. Breathe bloody in their throats. The boy you went to school with, who kisses you dizzy behind the Ultim factory, is holding a gun bigger than his body. You only leave home when home won't let you stay. No one leaves home unless home chases you. Fire under your feet, hot blood in your belly. It's not something you ever thought of doing until the blade runs threads into your neck. And even then, you carry the anthem until you breathe. Only tearing up your passport in the airport toilet, sobbing of each mouthful of paper made it clear that you won't be going back. You have to understand that no one puts their children in the boat unless the water is safer than land. No one burns their bombs under trains and beneath carriages. No one spends days and nights in the stomach of a truck, feeding on newspaper, unless the miles traveled means something more than a journey. No one crawls under fences. No one wants to be beaten. No one chooses refugee camps or strip search where your body is left aching. Or prison, because prison is safer than city on fire, or one prison guard is better than 40 men, or truckload of men who look like your father. No one could take it. No one could stomach it. No one's skin would be tough enough. They go home, blacks, refugees, dirty immigrants, asylum seekers. Sucking our country dries, niggers with their hands out. They smell strange, savage. Messes up their country, and now they want to mess ours up. How do the words, the dirty looks, roll off your back? Maybe because the pillow is softer than a lamp turned off, or the words are tender than 40 men between your legs are unsold, are easier to swallow than rubble, than bones, than your child body in pieces. I want to go home. I want to go home. But home is the mouth of a shark. Home is the barrel of a gun. And no one leaves home unless home chases you to the shore, unless home told you to quicken your legs, leave your clothes behind, crawl through the desert, wade through the ocean, drown, save, be hunger. Forget pride. Your survival is more important. No one leaves home unless home is a sweaty voice in your ear saying, leave. Run away from me now. I don't know what I've become, but I know anywhere else is safer than here. Thank you.
Next up, we have our guest speaker, Saeed. Saim is from Pakistan and he is a UWC Mahindra alumni. He has written for Al Jazeera and the New York Times before, and currently he is working for Politico based in Brussels as a news reporter. And please help me welcome him on stage.
It's really nice to be here. This is the first UWC I've been to that wasn't my own, and it's really nice. It's I don't know. I feel very happy to be here. So before I start, I just wanted to thank everybody here for having me. It's quite an honor for me to be here. I'm going to start by talking about choices that aren't mine, actually, because far more important people make far more important choices. So I'll start with, who here has seen Breaking Bad? Okay, so I'll start with Walter White. And I think that's a good place to start because I think it's actually a show that demonstrates the best how our choices can impact the lives of others and our own, and even the lives of people we've never met. So for those of you who haven't seen it, Breaking Bad is about a high school chemistry teacher who becomes a drug lord, essentially. I don't know what your chemistry teacher is like here, but anyway. He starts experimenting. He becomes a drug lord. In the first season, he ends up killing a person. In the second season, he ends up killing more people. And this guy's like this mild-mannered person, and he's got like this suburban house and this ugly car, and he wears like really stupid clothes. And all of a sudden, you just see him becoming a scarier person. And then in one season, you see that there's I'm gonna spoil it for you. I'm sorry. There's a plane crash, which was indirectly connected to the things that he was doing. And later on, you see him talking to his son, and his son's making excuses for his behavior, how he was disconnected, and he kept saying, look, there are choices that we make, and there are consequences for those choices. And the one thing that he did do, credit to him, even though he was an evil murderer, was that he owned those choices, right? And some of those choices had impacts that he couldn't control, and some of them, they directly impacted the relationships that he had with the people around him, whether they were, competitor drug lords or his family. Another example I want to bring up is Mohammed Bouazizi. Do you guys know who that is? He was a street vendor in Tunisia who set himself on fire. And I don't think he had an idea of what his actions are going to, how that would matter. But he said, okay, this government is taking too much from me, it's harassing me, it's forcing me to pay bribes I can't afford, I can't even keep my cart anymore, and so he set himself on fire. And then within months, there was a kind of uproar across an entire region of the world whose history is still being rewritten. And I also want to talk about Donald Trump, and I promise it's the only time I'm going to mention him, because I feel like there's an overload of that. In 2016, there was a nation of 300 million people that decided, okay, this is the guy we want to lead us for the next 4 years. And you can argue about Russian interference, and you can argue about like the Electoral College and popular vote, and however crazy Americans have their democracy, but whatever. Point being that a bunch of people decided that this is who we want as our leader, and he won fair and square. At the same time, there's another vote that I want to bring up. In 1988, there was a referendum in Chile. Any Chileans? Yeah, there you go. So in 88, there was a guy called Augusto Pinochet who'd been there for 15 years, and he'd just been hanging out and murdered everybody. And in 88, he sort of put it to the people, do you still want me around? And they're like, get out. And just like that, after 15 years, he was out. So there's something that kind of binds these 4 examples that I've given you about choices. One is that they're not individual. So even if you as an individual make them, they impact the surroundings, and the surroundings impact the choices that we make. And also, they're also sometimes not made as an individual choice. They're made as a collective choice, and I think an election is probably the best sort of example of that. And whether that's a good choice or whether that's a bad choice, so however we define what our choices are, they tend to have consequences. And in a lot of those instances, those consequences are unpredictable. We didn't know that there were going to be revolutions and wars across the Arab world because this one street vendor decided that, okay, I'm not going to take it anymore. We're still sort of trying to figure out what's been happening in the States since that election. And And so just keeping those couple of things in mind when it comes to the unpredictability of what some actions have, and the sort of inherently social nature of what those choices are. And it kind of leads me to a philosopher I like very much. Do you guys know Hannah Arendt? Do you guys study her? Do you guys have philosophy? Well, we did. Anyway. So she was a Jewish philosopher, and she's mostly known for writing about Nazis. But the stuff that I really like about her is she wrote this book called The Human Condition, in which she sort of described her idea of what she described as the active life and the contemplative life, and this sort of division between the public and the private. It's a bit complicated, but I'll try and simplify it a bit. So she says, and this is really cool, I think, she says an action, as she defines an action as speech or an act, a deed, is how we disclose to the world who we fundamentally are. It is only in a public sphere, when there are people watching, when there are people who perceive what you do, in that public space, when you say something or when you do something, that you commit an act. And it is in that act that you actually show who you are. So it's kind of a simple way of saying, we should be judged by our actions. But it's a bit more complicated than that, because the thing is, it gives us an opportunity to be who we are, and it gives us an opportunity to show to people who we are as well. Maybe in some cases where we don't know what we think of ourselves in any case. Like, you guys judging me right now is far, far different from how this entire speech is running in my head. But there's something real about that the idea that there's a public sphere in which this sort of interaction takes place. But the problem is, well, there are two problems. One is when, say, the people don't make the actions, when people just don't act, when they don't speak, or when they don't do anything, when they're apathetic, for example. And another issue is when there aren't any people to see you, when there aren't any people to hear you, to understand what you just did. And there are a lot of depressing examples of that. So for every Muhammad Bouazizi, there are scores of Tibetan monks who set themselves on fire. But that hasn't caused the same sort of impact that we would expect, at least in Tibet. For every Malala Yousafzai, there are hundreds of girls who were killed by militants who didn't want them to have access to an education. For every Alain Kurdi, there are thousands of children and corpses in the Mediterranean, nameless, whom we don't know. And they didn't cause that sense of very short-lived empathy that they had over here. And it brings us to a complicated and awkward kind of truth sometimes, which is that sometimes our actions don't have the kind of impact we want. And that's kind of depressing. So where does that leave us? Like, if we know that the things that we want to accomplish, the things that we want to do, even if we do our best to try and do them, it might not happen. Then where does that leave us? Personally, I believe that it leads us with a lot of humility. I think it's good to know that I single-handedly can't save the world just by bending to my will. I don't think anybody's got a magic formula for how to do that, and it kind of gives us a sense of how big the world is and how many people are in it and how they act. And it also adds a degree of skepticism, right, to the way people talk, to the way people see. Like, I mean, when you have, say, an election, and then you imagine like day one, whenever you have a new leader, everything's going to be completely different, and it turns out that it isn't for the most part. But at the same time, I think we need to sort of rethink a little bit about linking how our intentions to the kind of impact that we want to make. And it kind of forces us to think of other reasons for why we think we should be doing things. If I know, and I don't, to be honest, like I don't know whether I'll save the world or not. I'd like to think I would, but if I don't, then at least I'll know that there's something that I should be doing, because if I know that I'm not going to do it, then why bother, right? So there's small choices that we make. We try to switch the lights off when we leave the house because we care about the environment, because we care about climate change. Although the light bulb, I'm not quite sure how much of an impact that's going to make the greenhouse gas emissions. But we do it. We could decide to become a lobbyist for a tobacco company and encourage people to smoke, right? In the grand scheme of things, I don't know how many people that would kill, but like, it's a choice that we make that we can do as an individual, and we can try to get more people smoking. But those are the kind of choices that we have control over, and you kind of decide for yourself whether that's something that you want to do. You guys all decided to go to a UWC, which is why you're here. What kind of impact that is going to have in the grand scheme of things, I mean, I don't know. And to be honest, neither do you. But it could be cool, or it could be just kind of lame. Like, it might not be interesting at all. Like, I don't know. But these are some of the choices that we make, and we don't know what kind of impact they're going to have. I want to sort of frame this sort of philosophical mumbo jumbo and sort of relate it back to the choices that I've made a little bit. I'm from Karachi in Pakistan, and I did decide to go to UWC. I did not decide to go to India. I did not want to go to India. Not because I don't like it. It's hard, and like it's right there. You want to go somewhere far away, and everyone in Pakistan was applying to here, and I was like, all right, fine. But because the choice that I did make was that I wanted to leave, at least for a bit, and there was something about being in India which was, I think, kind of unique to being Pakistani in India than to being from anywhere else, because they don't like us very much. And they tried very, very hard not to let me in, and they tried very, very hard to get me out as soon as possible. But they're also not very good at doing either of those things. So I ended up doing a lot more than they wanted me to do. So I could fit in very easily. I don't know whether you could tell. And so I kind of went around, and this is entirely unsafe, by the way. This is a terrible idea. But I kind of just pretended to be Indian and traveled around everywhere to places even like other foreign nationals couldn't go. And it was incredible. It was the most moving experience of my life. And the reason why it was so is because, you know, I went in doing this very sort of brown South Asian engineering thing, and getting out, going like, okay, well, there are these two countries which are kind of the same, and I just wish that they'd talk to each other more, and I wanted to do something about it. And I figured I had a story to tell, so I wanted to tell it, and I went back to Pakistan, and I decided, okay, I could do the political thing. I could try to be, you know, a politician, make change and all that sort of stuff. But in Pakistan, politics is a different game. You either need to have lots of guns, lots of money, or you need to win a World Cup, and I didn't do any of those things. So that made it hard. So then the other sort of choice that I had was, okay, I'll just try to tell stories, right? And so that kind of made me want to be a journalist. And so there's a weird, very strange border ceremony that takes place in India and Pakistan, where they get these like really, really big guys to just sort of shout at each other. And it's really that. Like, I mean, you can YouTube it, honestly. And the thing is, we're short people, so I don't know where they pick these guys from, but they make them look really big and really imposing. And I went to this border ceremony from the Indian side, and that was kind of crazy because everyone was just shouting really nasty things at the other side, and I'd been from the other side, from the Pakistani side as well. So it just kind of made me realize this is really bad. Like, if everyone finds out that there's actually a Pakistani amongst all of these guys shouting at them, it's not going to be pretty. And so I decided to write about it because I just thought it was a very strange experience, and I sent it out, and the New York Times published it, and I was just like, okay, if they did, then it seems like people might be interested in reading that, right? And so I figured, okay, this is what I want to do. So I studied in the U.S. I came back. I wanted to work at a newspaper in Pakistan. I started working there, and things got pretty ugly very, very soon. And this brings me to the second choice that I made. The first one was coming back. I think the harder one was to leave again. One of the things that happened, which made this whole journalism India-Pakistan thing so exciting for me, was that when I went back home, there was a lady I met. Her name was Sabine Mahmood. She ran a cafe, and it was kind of like this sort of liberal bastion in Karachi. So you'd have like exhibitions and like underground bands and like open mic nights and poetry nights, and everyone could do something and perform. So I went to her and I said, look, I just think this is really interesting that I went to India and I want to tell people how weird that place is. And she said, okay, cool, like tell me about it. And so we chatted for like an hour or two, and then she's like, yeah, that sounds super interesting. So she got me a mic and she got me an audience, and she said, okay, tell them about what you saw, what you did. And so I did, and that became a thing. Like there were a bunch of journalists in India that heard about it, that got in touch with me. I was introduced to an entire community of people that were doing that work. And 2.5 years ago, that lady who had me and hosted me at her cafe was shot dead. She was leaving the cafe, and she was in her car with her mother, and she was shot 17 times by a motorcycle that was driving by, and then that was it. And one of the things you realize about being home and being in that sort of environment is that some of the choices that people make in terms of what they want to do have consequences which aren't only out of their control, but also aren't acceptable. And I realized that there's no reward in that, which is a very sort of awful thing to realize. And I thought, okay, if I do this thing, if I continue writing and talking about things, I don't know if it's rewarding enough. And not just in terms of like the fear of being persecuted, which I mean you kind of have to deal with once you're there, but also the fear of having gone through that trauma, through that threat, and then realizing people also just might not care. Which is why this idea of there being a sort of interactive public, people responding to one another's actions is so important. And because it is by definition unpredictable, it kind of makes it very, very difficult to continue going through that. Day after day, not knowing whether the work that you do is valuable, whether the choices that you've made are good. So I decided to go elsewhere. I did a master's a couple of years ago, and then I got this job in Brussels, and it's really nice. I do European tax policy, and shipping. It's quite exciting. But it's also interesting because the thing is that I don't think the work that I do is any less valuable. It's just the way that I think about what I do is very different. And so in terms of thinking about what I think is the right thing to do, what I think is an honorable thing to do, what I think is valuable to society as a whole, I believe all of those things. But I'm also not under the sort of impression that I'm going to topple governments today, which I might. I'm still holding out for it. Just if you got any scoops. But I think it kind of you realize that some choices do have some consequences, and you just kind of have to hedge, really, to try to understand the choices you make and the sort of consequences that you're willing to accept, despite knowing the fact that, as I said, they're unpredictable. I think I've gotten a modicum of predictability since I moved to Brussels last year, but I also think, given the time, it was the right choice to make. That's that's kind of it, really. Let me see if there's anything else. Yeah, that's it. I don't know what that means for your choices, really. This isn't advice. I have no advice to give. It's just, in fact, it's kind of the opposite advice, because I'm saying that making your choices harder because you don't know what they're going to lead to. So that doesn't leave you any better off. I'm sorry about that. But yeah, that's that's sort of what I had to say.
Hello, my name is Uresa Ahmeti and I come from Kosovo. First of all, I am really amazed by what you just said. I think that honest stories are the best advice you can give just because they give insights. But my question is, because I come from a country where really screwed up things happen. Maybe not as bad as in Pakistan, but there are really bad things happening. And you said something about doing valuable work and whether people will care at the end. But my question is, if I go out of my country because some couple of people don't care and then somebody else leaves, how will the change come, and how can we ensure that we actually make people care in some way or another? Because it's this whole cycle that we need to break, and it's really challenging for me to see how to break through that.
The challenge with breaking the cycle is the same sort of challenge with how the cycle was made, which is that there's only a certain extent to which we can be responsible for other people's action. Sorry. I mean, I'll give you an example, right? Like, so every time there's an election, you have tons of people that are campaigning, that are going door to door, and they're doing everything they can to get a certain outcome that they think is desirable for everyone, right? The thing is, sometimes that works, where campaigns are very, very successful in doing that, in mobilizing people, and sometimes they're not. I don't think trying is connected to that outcome. Just a slight philosophical aside again, I apologize, is there's this idea of consequentialism, right? That you kind of judge an action based on what the result of what that action will be. And there's something, I think, really terrifying about that for me personally, because it means that no matter how hard you try, if you fail, then that effort is just kind of lost, because it didn't bring about the sort of results that you want. And I think that's a lot of pressure. I think, again, as I was saying, what a better way for me to just sort of think about it. And it doesn't mean any sort of difference in action. It just means that you do what you think is the right thing to do. You do it because nobody else does it. You do it because you can't sleep at night otherwise. You do it because somebody has to. Yeah. So I think there are an entire different kind of justifications we can see for trying to do better, to make the sort of change that we want to see. But I think that we're carrying a much larger burden. And I think when we think that our efforts are entirely predicated on the fact that we're going to bring that sea change that we want, which we could. I really, really want to emphasize this. I'm not saying that it's not going to happen. I'm just saying that it's unpredictable. So we don't know when, and we don't know how, because other people's actions don't work the same way. I mean, I'll give you another example, right? So the Harvey Weinstein story comes out in the New York Times. And then a month later, the defense secretary of the United Kingdom resigns for inappropriate behavior. Now, a Hollywood mogul and the defense secretary of the UK they don't have much in common apart from the fact that they're creepy old white men. But apart from that, you can't imagine that resignation in an atmosphere in which Harvey Weinstein didn't take place. So we don't know how this stuff happens. It just does, and that's why revolutions are so hard to predict. so the maximum that we can do within this sort of entire ocean of people doing things is to do what we think we ought to do, and sometimes not doing the things that we ought to do. So we don't know. Again, it doesn't help you, I know, but like we don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm very glad to come here too.
I have a question about what is your thought on like you actually in facing this kind of problem, you actually like kind of like for example like in terms of like philosophical approach, do we need to like in terms of like for example like philosophical approach, do we need to make like do we need to strive for like a single theory that can like explain this whole movement, or shall we just be more pragmatic? What do you personally think about it?
I don't know, man. I don't know. I mean, there's some basic things that we know, right? People are people, so some are not very nice and some are pretty nice. There are people we like and people we don't like, so I mean, it's a sea of very it's chaos out there, and we just kind of have to navigate, right? And there's a very sort of interesting divide between a core that we consider to be of ourself and like who we want to be, and still try to navigate it. And the thing is that we live in a society in which some societies, so this one's quite nice, but like other societies where it's much harder to do that. I don't know. I think people make different choices with how they do that. I was telling. By the way, I also want to have a special shout out for the Metas who are hosting me here, and were absolutely wonderful to me 10 years ago, and still are wonderful, and I'm really happy to see them again. So I was telling them last night that the way my boss when I was in Karachi used to handle being in Pakistan, dealing with just like death and murder every day, was by just not caring. He had 2 daughters, and he just used to think about them and take them to their ballet lessons and take them to their music lessons and then pick them up from school. And the rest of the city's burning, and I think that kind of focus kind of saves you from just the abjectness of everything else in terms of the information that you're taking. So that was one way to do it. My way to do it was like, okay, I'm kind of done. So it just kind of depends, I suppose, on what everyone's willing to do and how the society that they're in impacts them. I didn't think it was that good an answer, but thanks.
Hi, my name is Amelia. I'm from Switzerland.
Hi.
And I wanted to ask you, when you make a choice, do you act on intention, a sense of duty, or the idea of creating a consequence?
Well, I mean, that's kind of the core of it, right? I think there's a far simpler answer, to be honest, which is you kind of enjoy it. You do stuff that you enjoy doing, and I think that's a good basis. It gets far more complicated, and you have to find more sort of philosophical justifications when it's a bit more awkward than that. When you start doing things that you don't enjoy, is when you have to find different reasons for why you do them. But I mean, obviously, you'd want to think that there are bigger things at play than simple hedonism, right? Like this idea that like my pleasure is the only thing that actually matters. But I don't know. I feel like I'm not giving a lot of answers. It kind of depends on what the situation is, right? Like you do all kinds of things in different situations. Like if you're in your kitchen here and the sink's a mess, and nobody else is going to do it, and are you going to be the person who does it? And what does that say about you as a community? And I mean that as a very legit sort of like philosophical question, right? Are you going to be the person who does it? Are you going to do it because it's the right thing to do? Are you going to do it because no one else is going to do it? Are you not going to do it? Because it says a lot about the sort of society that you live in and who is the point designate to do that? Who is the sort of designated driver? Like all of those kind of things pop up in really odd situations. So I don't know. It just kind of depends, I suppose, on how we react to certain things around us and what we feel more strongly about.
Thank you.
Stop it.
Do you think it's easier to be was it easier for you to be ignorant and more blissful in that sense when you when you started living in Brussels as compared to when you were living in Karachi?
No, not at all actually. I think it was much harder because then you have to rack with guilt, which doesn't help. You can't just forget it all and know that everyone else, one, doesn't have the privilege to do what you did, and two, is still living there. So no, it's not easy at all. But it's also a bit self-indulgent because it's not really about my feelings. I mean, I don't think anybody in Pakistan really cares how I feel about it. I think it's far more. It's something for me to deal with, but then I think the rest, as it was, continues. And that's also part of the choices, right? Like, I mean, in terms of the larger impact of me leaving, I don't know it. I think it's minor, or kind of infinitesimal. But that's the consequences. I mean, the most direct consequences of that are the ones that I have to deal with, and no, they're not easy. But at the same time, I'm not complaining for being in Brussels.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
My question is a bit more generic in a sense, because alright, you talked about how you make your choices, right? Like the choice to leave, the choice to be in Pakistan or not be. But what I'm getting at is more towards the realm of, okay, you're having this cycle now when there's an influx of a lot of people leaving the community, right? So there's I want to do change but I can't, so you know what, I'm going to leave. And there's a majority that do not come back, and it's also sort of a brain drain, right? So now the people are there, it's now it's a vicious cycle almost, right? So it's not going to change. But then how do you avoid that? You can, but then if you a personal choice can be so much more communal. Because it's also
it always is.
Yeah, exactly. It's like starting a trend, right? So I mean, not being or personal or anything, but then somebody who's
totally be personal.
Okay, somebody who's into journalism and especially in a place like Pakistan, and having that Indian context with, and the whole not having a freedom of speech. If people like that are so motivated start to leave, how do you end the vicious cycle?
You don't.
But then then it's done. You kind of say okay, there's no way back. So let's just sit down.
I mean that's kind of the reality that I had to reckon with, and it's not an uplifting one. I understand that very, very well. I'll give you an example. All right. So I came back in 2013, and in about a year after, there was a terror attack in Pakistan in a town called Peshawar, in which there were 138 school children that were killed, and that was a very big sort of watershed moment for a lot of people in Pakistan. And to be honest, it shouldn't have been. There have been attacks that have been worse, more deadly. But for some reason it was, and I was at the desk. I was reporting on it when it was taking place. I saw the death toll climb from 8 when I was just about to leave for work, and then by the time I got there it was 80, and then I kept reporting, and then it was 150 by the end of the day. And then there was something really profound about that experience. So there was a sort of collective mourning. It was my mother's birthday that week. We canceled dinner because how do you celebrate a birthday when something like that happens? And we really hoped that something would change. Now the thing is that we've got a government that very much encourages a policy of promoting these kind of terror activities as long as it's not Pakistanis. And even then, as long as it's not select Pakistanis. If it's Shias, Hindus, Christians, Baloch, Hazaras, we don't really care. But these kids were Sunni, and these kids a lot of them were children of the military. So they were very upset about that. And you'd hope that, okay, that's going to change some sort of policy when it comes to how the Pakistani military deals with terror. And it kind of made things worse in a way, right? Like they brought back the death penalty. They sort of expanded the way military courts work. They were just, I mean, they were arresting kids on minor charges and then labeled them as terror offenses and then started jailing them. And you realized, 2 years later, 3 years later, that. I don't know. I don't want to get too much into Pakistani politics because it's depressing and it's really not interesting for the rest of you. That all of the sort of core elements of everything that you would think is cancerous to a society is not just there. It's thriving, and you realize that you're there throughout. Right? You're writing all those reports. You're interviewing all those victims. Every time there was a terrorist attack in Pakistan, we had to dispatch a reporter to the parents, to the loved ones of the victims, and go like, how do you feel? It's kind of disgusting in how we did it, but like, what else are you going to do? And so you do that, and you realize that you can come up with as many heartbreaking stories, you can reference as much broken glass and like blood on the roads as you want, and this stuff is going to happen the day after, it's going to happen next week, it's going to happen next month. And you realize that what you're doing actually isn't doing anything. Yeah, it's not doing anything. And you realize that you can continue to do it because you can continue to do it because you think it's important. You can continue to do it because you can hope that at some point there is going to be a change which hasn't come yet. And both of those things are true. It is important, and there could be a change that hasn't come yet. But it also doesn't leave you in the now feeling very good about yourself. Because what you're essentially doing is obituary writing every day rather than actually seeing the change that you want to make. And that's really disheartening, and it was for me. And I think there are stronger people than I am that have made that choice to stay. But I couldn't.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your speech and the answers. I'm Willow, coming from mainland China, and I know that there are a lot of structural violence from media censorship up to physical aspects in terms of journalism in various countries. And as you said that you can't predict what's going to happen, whether you're going to get arrested or like just be safe. But what I'm wondering is that do you take any measures to actually protect yourself when you're reporting politically related issues or events or something like that?
I take a few measures now than I did before. But it was a tough environment, and I think there's only so much you can do when you're in that sort of environment. One of the things that we, as local journalists in Pakistan, always used to complain about when it came to the foreign correspondents is that they only lived in the capital, and they only lived in like these big sort of security blocks with like round-the-clock protection, and would hardly ever leave the city. And that compromises your reporting, obviously, because you don't talk to people, because you don't see things, because you don't go out, and all the information that you're already getting is very filtered. So it was always a kind of delicate balance between keeping that sort of sort of basic safety precautions in mind, and at the same time knowing that, well, I mean, you need to get a story and you need to get a good one. So what do you need to do about that? So that was always the sort of dilemma.
What safety precautions do you take? How do you take them?
It's about 2 months after I started working. 2 months after I started working at my first job out of college, the newsroom that I was working in was attacked. There were 2 guys on motorcycles that had these homemade grenades, and they were shooting at the guards on the doors. And with our newsroom, so we had an Urdu newspaper, an English newspaper, and like a TV channel that were all in the same building. I was in the basement, which is where the English newsroom was. And we had no idea what was happening. We just heard a bunch of explosions outside. And you know, if you're in Karachi, you're always hearing explosions for some reason or the other. But after a while, you realize, okay, this is actually serious and there's something happening. And you don't know if they're coming in. What they did was what they called a warning shot. So they just wanted to warn the channel that they didn't like what we were doing. As far as who the they was concerned, I don't really know. Whether it was the government, whether it was terror groups, whether it was political parties, whether it was drugs, I have no idea. But what we did as a result was to get double reinforced concrete and then sandbags and then police protection around the clock. But then a month later, we had a sort of satellite van that was sending out the feed, and then we had the video camera, and then we had a guard, cameraman, and the driver that were killed in a drive-by shooting. So what you can do is you can take sort of concrete, and I mean that in a literal sense, safety measures. You can avoid going to places which you know could be a target. Like say 5-star hotels in Pakistan, which are always a target because they were targeting foreigners, don't stay in them. Avoid busy marketplaces after Friday prayers. In a lot of situations, don't go to Friday prayers. Avoid shrines, avoid Shia mosques, avoid Hindu temples. There's kind of, you start seeing patterns where which places might be a bit more troublesome, and who are the people that are targeted. And being a Sunni male in Pakistan is a degree of privilege that I know will carry me wherever I go. So there's certain sort of systemic factors, but then also you live in a very, very unpredictable place. So there's only so much you can do.
Thank you very much.
We have one more question here.
Hello. I want to ask you if you've ever had to self-censor your work and its content as a measure to protect yourself, and if you have, how do you feel about it, like withholding truth because you feel like a threat, and like how have you dealt with it?
So the Pakistani government's very, very clever in that most of the censorship that's done in Pakistan is self-censorship, because there's a kind of unwritten line about what we think people are going to like and not like, and the words we can use to describe them. So I'll give you an example, right? We have an intelligence agency in Pakistan called the ISI, and it's really nasty, like not good, right? And they're very scary, and they don't like many of the things that journalists report on. But the thing is, if we mention them by name, they're not going to like it very much. So we use euphemisms, in which we try to convey what we actually mean, but not actually saying it. So there are 2 that we used to use at my newspaper that I used to work at. One was, we just called them agencies. So instead of saying the agency, we'd say, just people. They've been telling us that this has been happening. And another one which we used also was similar. It was LEAs, law enforcement agencies. And again, it kind of obscures what you're talking about. There was a very terrifying political party in my city. And they used to do these drive-by shootings all the time, and they were very, very dangerous. So instead of actually mentioning the party by name, there's almost like, it's almost a joke now. The way we used to refer to them was unidentified persons. And we knew they're easy to identify, to an extent that whenever we said unidentified persons, people knew who we were talking about, because when they were actually unidentified, we'd use a different phrase. And it's kind of random, because the thing is, like, the Taliban doesn't issue a guideline of the things you can say and you can't say. After the 3 people in my office that were killed, the most surreal thing happened. The spokesperson of the Taliban at the time, who has a Gmail account, by the way, we used to get a daily newsletter from the Taliban saying, okay, we killed these guys. So he called in. So he called in on the national sort of broadcaster and said, yeah, we got you guys, what's up? And so we had this TV anchor who was kind of famous, who was negotiating with him on live television. And he said, look, is there a story that we wrote that you didn't like? Is there something in particular why you're targeting us and not anybody else? And they go like, no, we just don't like what you do. We don't like your angle. We don't like your politics. And he goes like, well, I mean, what if we? And so this negotiation was happening on live television, right? He goes like, well, what if we stop writing about you? Would you like that? And then he goes, well, we'll see, maybe. There's no clue as to what is liked and what is not. So it's kind of like an ad hoc system. The military is always a big issue. So again, we use euphemisms. So a lot of columnists, they refer to the military as the boys. A lot of them refer to them as the boots, the khakis, the powers that be. I like that one. So you always have to do that. It's kind of like a survival mechanism for the most part. So that's actually the modus operandi. Actual censorship, where you get a call from the government or from the Taliban saying, okay, we don't like the story, please don't do it, please don't publish it, is far rarer. So that does happen, but not that often.
Can I ask first, and then I can pass the mic? Yeah, we have to. Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
All right, where are you? Oh, there you go. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, and we had a very interesting conversation last night as well. And I think I do understand your whole idea of eventually being numb to what's happening, and I completely get it. And I might come across as being idealistic, but I just feel there's a very fine line between being numb and giving up in a way. And don't you think it's a bit too early to give up in certain situations?
I wouldn't make that. I want to be absolutely clear about this. The reason why I'm here, the reason why I love this school so much, and the reason why I feel so grateful to it, is that I don't feel like idealism is a bad thing, and I don't feel like it's something I personally have even given up. I think it's absolutely wonderful, and I think it's so inspiring to be here again in this sort of silo where everyone's got these grand ideas about the things that they want to do, and I really want you to do them. That goes without any sort of preface, that goes without any sort of caveat. My question is, my sort of idea is, how do you manage that when you don't see the results that you want to see? My sort of the way that I did it personally was manage it in a way in which I still end up doing the things that I want to do, but sort of controlling the sort of negative impact that has on me. And I think everyone has a different threshold for that. So there's nothing prescriptive about how to go about. Like, I really want all of you to do whatever it is in the world that you want. Just don't be like a tobacco lobbyist. That's my only request. But it's yeah. So I don't wanna sound like I feel kind of bad about the questions in particular, because I didn't want this to be a downer. I really didn't. Like, I'm so happy. But to me, it's just about reconciliation of very difficult facts with a reality that you don't like, and sort of how to sort of reconcile what is happening with how you want things to be, and to try to create some sort of management system, in fact, to counter that threat to idealism, because I don't want it to die. I don't want people to go like, okay, this is hopeless. But at the same time, I don't want people to look at something and think that they alone can fix it when and how they want to. Maybe you can. That's what's exciting about this whole thing. But I don't know. I don't know if you can.
Hello.
Hi. How's it going?
Good. You?
Yeah, not bad. Yeah.
That's great. My name is Chris, and I'm
Hi,
from
Chris.
Poland. And from the whole speech, I really liked the speech. I really enjoyed it. But I have a question because I got the feeling that you say sometimes it's just impossible to make a change and sometimes it's just not worth it. Sometimes it's just too hard, right? But if we don't kind of make the change, we're gonna follow the lead, right? And for example, I don't know, in my country, for example, we struggled with communism. For example, many people didn't like it. And at the beginning, the solidarity movement, most of the people were like, oh my god, those people, they have no chance at all, right?
Yeah.
But at the end, we succeeded, right?
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, like, what do you think about that? Because I kind of get the feeling that sometimes it's just too hard to try, right? But we should try, because when we don't try, we follow the lead, right? And we don't change anything, right? So, as a follow-up to the question that was there, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes I think it's not about the results at the beginning, it's about the results at the end, right? That's what I think.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think, and that's a great example, right? Like of things moving in a way that few could have predicted, and then for the better. And yes, and that happens all the time, and that happens for good and for bad. And because then you have movements that you also didn't think would actually be a thing, and then you've got Nazis and people are debating whether they're good or bad. But what I'm saying is that like this kind of stuff happens a lot, but the only sort of caveat that I'm bringing to it is that I don't know how much control we have over it. People come together and magical things happen, right? And I think it's incredible, and I've been part of those sort of moments where that kind of happens. I'm just wondering that if we begin by seeking that, sometimes it gets a bit difficult to not see a solidarity movement, despite the amount of time that we spend on it, despite the amount of time that we so desperately want it to happen. And if it does, that's amazing, right? And you'd say that it's totally worth it. But then my question is, if it doesn't happen, then does that mean that it wasn't worth it? And how do you balance that?
But it's always worth it to try,
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. And yeah, I completely agree with that.
I will go without the mic, I think.
Yeah. I can repeat the question for you guys.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for being here. But I feel that yesterday I was just having a conversation that was more or less what you spoke to everyone right now. And I feel that right now I'm going through this struggle of how can we stick to an idealism that makes you keep on going, but at the same time doing something. Oh, thank you. Doing something feasible.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
But at the same time, I feel that, as you said, it's so many things that you want to deal with, so many problems, so many variables that you have to tackle, that sometimes you lose even that small spark. Sorry. And for me, I was wondering, what then is the meaning of the word change maker? Because right now it's sold for the entire world as this generation, our generation here, UWC, we have to be change makers. But what does the word actually mean? Because I feel that it's the same. It's the same. The past century, you have to be a CEO, and it's being sold like you have to be change makers. So we do everything that we can and put every structures in place because you have to find the change, you have to find the problem, you have to and then you kind of like, okay. So what?
It's a lot of pressure.
and then it's okay. So how can we keep on hold up to it and do something? You know?
Yeah. CINO is a great change maker. They did really well with our global economy, didn't they? No, I personally really don't like the term. I think it's kind of arrogant in a way. I think it kind of, it kind of puts this upon you in ways in which it's not true. Like, I mean, we're here, which is really nice. So, you know, we all ended up at a selective school, and we'll probably end up going to really nice universities and really nice jobs. But does that mean that we made a big change? I don't know. Maybe we could. But then there are lots of people who you wouldn't consider to be change makers, and then they actually impacted people in the world in far more in far deeper ways than we imagine. Like, you know, like Malala was like a 10-year-old girl living under the Taliban, and she said, okay, I'm going to write a blog about how this is working, and I'm going to talk about what they're doing, and I'm going to talk about how difficult it is for me to get to school. And then she gets shot for it. That's not how you'd predict a change maker's life to be, you know. But these sort of stories, they work in a way in which you can't script them. So again, I try to just add this caveat where I think if we assume that we'll do all the change that we want, then I don't know. I think people before us would have done the same thing, and I don't know whether they did that or not. And I don't know why our batch would be more special than others to have done that. But, and this is the more important thing, is that, as I said, Chris, right? Yeah, so I mean, trying is the most important thing. Like, otherwise, even within the sprint of Arendt, like if you don't try, then there's nothing, right? Then you don't exist really. Then your life's kind of meaningless, which brings on another degree of existential angst. But essentially, what I'm saying is try. Just do that. That's enough. You know, that's okay. I'm happy with that. You should be too. That's okay.
Okay, guys, we're gonna have maybe one or two last questions, and then you'll have a bit of free time before lunch. Also remember that the next round of workshops start at 1:30, and that the community panel starts at 4. So remember that. We will be sending reminders as well. So
there's a question over there.
Yeah, there? Okay.
It's coming.
Hello, thank you very much for your speech. I am Polina, and I'm from Russia.
Hi, Polina.
And I also wanted to ask a change, but a little bit from another angle.
Yeah.
You were talking about how you make a change, and if you take an action, it has consequences. And I got an impression that you meant that the actions we take can have random consequences, and the outcomes are the result of random consequences of our actions.
Yeah.
But wouldn't you agree, especially based on history, that there are certain actions which we can predict the consequences of, especially if you're talking about big events like paradigm shifts or bigger historical events? There are certain actions that we can be certain, to some extent, that would lead to a certain outcome. So what is your opinion about it? Or do you personally believe that every big action is just the result of random...
Could you give me an example of events you're talking about? The certainty?
Excuse me?
Could you give me an example?
An example, for example, if you talk about the outcomes of, for example, the reasons of war starting, we can have, of course not certainly, but we have certain actions which lead to it. We can outline reasons for that, which are based on the actions of certain people, right? I'm not that good at history, but I suppose, as far as I was educated in my school, there are certain reasons which lead to it. So would you agree on this? What is your view on that?
It's kind of complicated because, I mean, you have a Serb guy who murders an Austrian prince and then Germany invades Britain. Like, that's how the First World War started, right? The thing is, like, I mean, obviously there are always underlying causes, right? There are countries that want things, there are smaller countries that are afraid of bigger countries, there's always geopolitics at play. Underlying causes are always there. Like, when it comes to the Arab Spring, which I think is a really good example, it's not that people saw a street vendor set himself on fire and then Egypt was all of a sudden like, okay, we'll have a revolution. There were obviously lots of different issues that were burning up for a very, very long time that a lot of people were unhappy about. Those causes are always there, but the problem is that it's only in hindsight that we actually get to study them and see what was going on, because at the time everyone's just like, what is happening? And that's always more interesting, I think. And obviously there are certain consequences which are definitive, right? If I shoot somebody in the face, they're gonna die, and that death has consequences. But beyond that death, I don't know what they might be. So we can definitely control some of what our actions are going to be, and we can. That's kind of like the bit that I really like about the manifestation of one's actions as oneself, right? Because that's how you reveal yourself and who you are in the actions that you make. And so you can do that on a very, very basic sort of level. But beyond that, once you finish that action, I mean, you can't control what other people do with that. So that's what I think makes it a lot harder. Because, I mean, just simply put, you're responsible for your actions and not those of others, but they tend to influence each other in ways that we don't know. That's it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for your speech.
So as we said, the next round of workshops will start at 1:30, and now until lunch you have free time. Thank you so much.